Here's an updated look at my marine fish room. I've tried to record this video a few times, but it's just too loud with all the ear pumps humming and the water trickling, so I'm doing a voiceover. There's quite a few tanks in this 9 by 12 room, including my Frag system, my phytoplankton and rotifer cultures. That tank on the floor is a cull tank, and then I have my grow out tanks for baby clownfish. My broodstock tanks, there's currently 8 different pairs in there, and then I have the larval and baby tanks as well. The first pair is a domino pair. These guys, I don't really foresee them laying anytime soon. I've had them more than a year and a half, and they still don't really act like anything. These guys, on the other hand, started laying almost right away. The orange storm is actually one of my babies. He was born in this house January 30th, and the ocellaris female is just a random fish I acquired. They've laid a couple of clutches now. They've been quite small. This is actually the biggest one, but I've already been able to raise a few grandkid babies. So that's been pretty exciting to see everything go full circle. You will see there's all kinds of cyanobacteria in these tanks. I actually just cleaned most of them too, and then there's hair algae and other algae. This is simply a byproduct of the lights being on for a long time, the fact the fish are fed many times a day, and the sump is still lacking in filtration. There's just filter socks in here for now. I have been planning on building an algae scrubber. I just haven't gotten around to it. There is live rock in the bottom tanks, so that is helping a lot. The big thing is, now that winter is here, I've noticed that if all the heaters in this room come on, all those little tanks are plumbed independently, it will actually blow the breaker, which is unfortunate. I probably should have added another circuit to this room first, but everything was spiraling out of control cost-wise, so I figured I'd just wait and see if it worked out. Of course, it's not really working out, but I have made a few changes, and I do plan on getting another circuit installed very soon. The biggest thing is I've just cranked the baseboard heater. So it actually is more economical regardless of the electrical load to heat the room and not the tanks. You can see it's over 27 degrees Celsius, which is something like 81 Fahrenheit. It's a little bit warm for working in the room, but I guess it's kind of nice and cozy in here, and it takes a lot of the pressure off the heaters. All the tanks are pretty much at 79 to 80, so the heaters are doing very little. It does get slightly colder in the middle of the night, but again, this is preventing the breaker from tripping. And I've also been turning off my dehumidifier at night. That saves an additional 375 watts, so I should be good for now, but everything should be proper soon. I'm really hopeful that the Black Storm and Darwin will lay soon. They've been cleaning the pot like crazy. I guess the female is still a little bit young. Her face just recently turned black. When I first got her, it was still orange. I got these guys on New Year's Eve, so it's been, I guess, about 11 months since I've had them, and she was definitely bigger than the Storm back then. He is a little bit stubby, but I still think they'll produce good offspring. These two are a used pair I picked up. I always call fish I get from other systems used because they were in another tank. They're not straight from a store or hatchery. They're quite big. He had them for about 3 years, and it was a tank teardown. He'd been trying for about a year to sell everything and finally split them up. These guys, I believe, are frostbites. They have unique mask patterns that both of them have, so it'll be interesting to see if their kids will have that too. Given their age and size, they could spawn at any time, and hopefully that time is in the near future. Down below, which are really difficult to see at this time unfortunately, there's a pair of black snowflakes, and they have been spawning, but they're quite difficult. You can see they move the pot out of the way to lay on the glass, and they don't really stick to a schedule like the other fish. The other fish, most of them I can tell you within an hour of when they're going to lay eggs. These guys tend to lay in the middle of the night, and their eggs take forever to hatch, even though they're in a plumbed-in system. The next tank is just a pair of my orange storm babies. These guys won't produce for years, and I'll probably eventually swap them out. There's a black superstorm paired with one of my orange storms. Again, this is another pair I'd like to swap. I don't really like to mix orange and black fish, but I didn't have anyone else to throw in with her. Finally, there is an orange frostbite along with an orange ocellaris. These guys again are pretty small, so I don't expect them to spawn anytime soon. You'll see there's no lights on the bottom tanks except for the one. That's because I don't need more cyano in here algae to siphon out. Now looking at the larval and baby tanks, they do look quite messy, but most of that mess is airline tubing. The electrical is all pretty good. There's power bars mounted away from splashing and whatnot. And I'm using various different cheapo lights to light the fry. These guys are just a few days old. These ones here are from the orange storm and ocellaris in the other rack. So they're the grandkid fish. Again, these clutches are pretty small, but I'm already getting fish from them, so that's pretty exciting. Here I have a few lightning maroons, which are what got me started in clownfish breeding. I haven't raised any of them in many months. There's not a lot of demand for them, and I still have quite a few. But they take a long time to grow out. So it's probably 8 to 10 months till they reach sellable size. So I've decided to raise a few more. Unfortunately, this clutch was pretty small, so there's only about 15, so I'll probably raise one more. Here we see more ocellaris orange storms. These guys have just gone through metamorphosis, so they're just starting to resemble baby fish. Here are some older ones, and these ones, basically they're big enough that I'll move them to the top level of this rack, which is where they go before they go into grow out. Now the reason why I put the older ones on top, which are these guys here, is because these fish are much tougher now. There's 88 in this tank, and I would predict that at least 80, probably 85 of them will survive. And I can use a bigger hose to siphon the tank. I don't have to worry about sucking them up as much. Whereas for the rows below, I need to see much better and use a small airline tube for siphoning. So my feet need to be on the ground for that. But for these ones, it's a little bit easier. I am trying to find one particular clownfish now. Usually he's very easy to find, but of course now that I'm shooting this video, I had a little bit of difficulty. So while there is quite a variation, I would guess probably 60% of them are some form of storm. The rest are the standard ocellaris or misbar ocellaris. But this one guy here looks different than any in this clutch or previous clutches. So he's missing the middle stripe or storm or whatever you want to call it. So he's almost like a naked storm. He has got a white mouth too and some interesting spots. Given that he is pretty small, his pattern could still change, but if he continues to look this cool, he'll get his own dedicated video in the future and maybe his own dedicated tank. He's definitely a keeper, but I don't really need any more tanks right now. Here's the grow out system. It's a 60-gallon tank plumbed into some other tanks. There's currently 243 ocellaris in this tank, and I would guess probably 60% of them are the orange storms. The only problem with the 60-gallon tank is it's quite tall, so it's a little bit of a pain to siphon the bottom. You can see there's a lot of poop and uneaten food. I don't really add anything to the tank. I could add plastic plants, but they're just going to accumulate crap, so I've kept it bare for the time being. Another tank that's plumbed into this system is, I believe it's a 56-gallon tank. This is where my remaining maroons are. I would guess there's probably 50 to 60 in here, and they're definitely sellable size. It's just obviously there's a smaller market for them. They kind of get a bad rap as far as how aggressive they are. They are more aggressive than ocellaris, but I don't think they're quite the devils that a lot of people make them out to be. And they also have much more unique patterns than many of the ocellaris varieties. I have my own personal harem in my frag tank. These are some of my earlier ones, so there are a couple in here that I would say are not quite perfect. But I've had them in here for about 2 years. There's 13 in this 50-gallon lowboy along with a convict tang, and they seem to get along pretty well. There are a few interesting frags in here, but it's mostly overgrown Xena. Generally, I try and unload the frags at the same time that I sell fish. Speaking of selling fish, I mentioned that some of those guys were not perfect. Culling is something that a lot of people don't want to talk about, but you know, it has to be done if you want to sell quality fish. Fortunately, I have a frogfish to take care of most of my calls, but in that tank of 243, I would guess that at least 5 to 10% of them are not going to be sellable. They're either going to have flared gills, weird shaped heads, sometimes missing gill plates, which I think is a result of fighting. But regardless, every single fish you raise is not going to be sellable. That tank on the floor actually contains some older maroons that were definitely not sellable, and I keep them to feed my frogfish. So yeah, that's the whole room. Again, there's not many marine fish rooms on YouTube other than fancy sump rooms. So if you have any questions, let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Happy reefing.